Okay, so you join me here today on race 5 of this season's ZRL. Today we're on Chasing the Sun Loop in Mercury Islands. It's a very interesting race course. It's one of those in a very similar vein to, say, the Muckle Yin. It's got a little bit of something for everyone. So it's got two early sprints. One of the sprints is very, very early at only 0.7 kilometres in the alley sprint. So that essentially is kind of straight out of the pens. And then you've got the railway sprint that comes very shortly after a kilometre 3.9. And then the race gets quite testing. The course gets a little bit testing. It at the end of that climb, it pretty much goes straight up the rooftop KOM. There's another sprint, a little bit of sort of flat and rollers. Then another sprint before we hit the quite disliked, I think, by many, dirt temple KOM, with another sprint then the other side, and then the final sprint. So it's a 35 kilometre route today. Little bit of something for everyone, but really not at all a straightforward course. We had a little technical sort of discussion before the start, and sort of Howell, who sort of works as our captain then, he had mentioned to me to go all in for these first two sprints. So this is quite a high level A group. In some of the past races, there's been guys who have averaged over 5.3, 5.4 watts per kilo for the entire races in some of the other events. My sort of weaker end probably is that sustained power. I am never ever getting anywhere near that, at least not now. Sustained power and having a high watts per kilo is probably my weaker end. I am sort of slightly towards the heavier end for a rider, even though I have to say this morning I actually had the lightest weigh-in that I've had probably in my entire adult life. So I have been working hard recently on kind of dropping a few kilos. I was down to 78.3 this morning, but I still just don't have that really high, 6 watts per kilo then that would be needed to get up those climbs. So for me, my kind of job was to 100% target those two early sprints and try and get some really good fastest through points. And if it worked out well, if I was lucky to actually try and take some first across the line as well, if I got the timing right. These two sprints are very long. The first sprint is just shy of 500 metres. The second sprint is 640 metres long. So they are really long sprint segments. Now, historically, we've been through these quite a number of times in different ZRL races, and these longer sprints have always been something that has kind of suited me a little bit better. I am someone who is slightly more sort of sprint orientated in my sort of my riding makeup. I'm far away from what you could ever consider to be like one of the guys who's like a bit of a true sprinter then, someone who's got a really high sort of raw watts. I can't go peaking at sort of 14 or 1500 watts. I don't have that, but I'm a little bit, I don't sort of fall off a cliff then. So maybe I'll peak at 11, 1200, but actually it doesn't drop off a cliff really quickly. So these kind of longer sprint efforts where you're looking at possibly a sort of 30 seconds probably sprint, or a 30-second effort if we include a little bit of raising the power into the lead in, tend to suit me a little bit better. So kind of my job really was these first two sprints, knowing that it was likely that I was never going to be able to get over the KOM with this type of field. So this way, it was better that I could possibly contribute to the team early on, rather than not go for these sprints, maybe get over the first KOM. I probably would have got over the rooftop KOM. I almost certainly wouldn't have got over the second KOM. So this was a better way of me actually playing a role for our team today. So the first sprint's coming up shortly. So I've just dropped off the back of the pack here. We've headed out to the pens. A couple of riders have gone very long for first across the line, but I've just dropped off the back of the pack, and I'm starting just as we hit that start line of the segment to actually rush the back of the back of the group. That way I'm gaining a little bit of speed, and just maybe a couple of seconds after crossing that start line, it's time to go all in. So from the back of the pack there, you've got all those riders to actually kind of draft through. So just hitting out from the back, coming through to the front, and it just flashes up on the left-hand side there, fastest through time, and was actually the fourth rider across the line. So that's a really solid 20 points for the fastest through. And then I would have taken fourth then, which I think is 6 points, by being actually fourth across the line. So that was, I was quite happy with that. Really nice early haul of points. And, like I was saying before the start, had I sort of sat in and thinking about the long game, the likelihood is I wouldn't have survived over the KOMs with the guys who are going to be putting out sustained 6 watts per kilo. So I would have got dropped anyway. So I'm better off targeting these early segments. We haven't got long before we head on to the rooftop, the railway KOM. That'll be coming up in just over or just under 2K's time. So it was now a case, the pack is kind of reforming, and it's now a case of just kind of trying to do the minimum effort I can to try and get a bit of recovery into the legs before hitting out again, because this second sprint segment is probably a little bit more technical than the first. There's a short little kicker that takes you up from the kind of the downtown Yokio area up to the railway sprint. So I was kind of conscious that some riders might try going quite long there and looking for those sort of first across the line points. Maybe those racers that don't quite have a good sprint, they may want to go long. So I was kind of thinking that the effort going into this might actually be slightly different. But I mean, we're now 4 minutes into the race, and we are fast approaching our second sprint segment. So it's a really intense start to this course here. So with these sprint efforts, because they are so long, because you are looking at probably more like a 30-second effort rather than a 10 or a 15-second sprint, I personally feel that there's a little bit more of pacing that needs to go into it than what would be normal in a standard sprint for the line. So I personally, I don't know how other riders have approached it, but for me personally, you don't quite go all in at the start, because if you did go for an absolute 100% full in sprint, I mean, I didn't do that on the alley sprint that we've just been through. I didn't kind of go absolutely all in early on, because you kind of need to pace that effort a little bit. So you're probably going maybe 95% all in, but not quite 100%, because there's a risk that you're going to die after 10 or 15 seconds. So it's just important with these really long sprints just to kind of bear that in mind, because you are looking at perhaps a 30-second game. Okay, so that's the little rise there. I tried to sort of initially approach it towards the front of the pack, because I was conscious that riders were really going to push hard. But like with the first sprint, I've now allowed myself to drop slightly to the back of the pack there. But that heart rate's already up 183. That was a bit of an effort coming into this, and it's so soon after the first sprint. Okay, this time we have got an aero helmet. And I do kind of get this slightly wrong here. We're now just across the start line, and whereas on the first sprint I did manage to hold off the back of the pack and actually rush the group, what's happened to me this time is that I was off the back of the pack. I was so conscious of them actually kind of breaking away on that little rise that I actually ended up doing too much effort and I was in the pack. So my sprint here has been from within the middle of the pack. So I haven't quite had the number of riders to draft through. So very early on there in that sprint, I was actually kind of out front on my own. There were a couple of riders that I did manage to kind of go through as I approached the line. So I would have got a little bit of draft there. But luckily I did manage second, fastest time. And it was also 7th first across the line. So again, very good points. 19 points for the second. Very, very happy with that. And actually, the first across the line coming across in 7th were kind of bonuses, really. But had I perhaps approached it from slightly further back in the pack, I would have got slightly faster time, which, there was, I think, maybe 0.2 seconds in that between me and first. Had I given myself that rush room, come from the back of the pack, there's no doubt that I would have been able to have gone slightly faster. I don't think it actually mattered in this instance, because had I done that, I probably wouldn't have got 7th in first across the line. So it kind of that made up for the loss of 1 point there. Okay, as you can see, we are very, very quickly onto the rooftop KOM. I was slightly tailed off the pack there after that effort. I've managed to get back into the pack, but I am kind of right on the tail end of it here as we head on to these sort of steeper gradients. Heart rate's already well up in the 180s, and even though this climb is quite draftable, I've survived this climb in in a very strong A-field race before, because it is quite draftable. It's got steeper pitches, like we're on one of the slightly steeper pitches now, and then flatter sections, and it's quite a high-speed climb. But having done those two there's two 30-second kind of max efforts have happened there in the first 5 minutes of the race. I just don't have it. I don't have it to go again this quickly to actually hold on to these guys. So they've very, very quickly they've gone, and I'm well down now. I'm sort of right finishing. I'm towards the back of the entire field, which on the face of it is a little bit disappointing, However, for my ZRL racing is a team event, and if you finish towards the back of the field, it almost doesn't matter, perhaps, if you've been able to play a role. So today, my role was to target those early sprints. Some riders who are a much higher level than me may very well be able to target those sprints and hold in the group, and maybe get a really good finishing position. For myself, that isn't something that's going to be able to happen at this point. Particularly in these sort of higher level A fields, that isn't something that's quite new to me. But I'm keen to race here and try and improve. But for me, I had that early role. I was given that early role. Target those first two sprints. Try and get as good a points as you can. And then actually, that's almost sort of your job done. Hang in if you can. I did try and hang in, but it just wasn't going to happen here. Try to hang in. It wasn't to be today. So I'm joined by two riders here. There's two riders behind me, and we are making up the last 5 riders of the entire race. So basically, not a lot happens from here to the finish. So I'm not going to bore anyone with that. I'll quickly skip through to the finish, and we'll have a little look at perhaps how that played out. So we're here just in the last couple of kilometres of the race. Those two riders that were initially with me, we were joined with the two riders who were behind. So the two riders who were with me were from the same team, and these two riders who were behind are from the same team. And it actually, even though that we were down in, sort of 39th to 44th position, it actually at points turned into quite the effort. With there being two riders from the same team, one of them would have a little attack, which I'd think, I got to kind of follow that, and then bring the other guy back, and then he would attack. So these guys actually, it turned into a little bit of a race. because it's always important to bear in mind, even though we are now going to finish towards the back of the field for finish line points, take the first race of this season as an example. Our team actually won it by 1 point. So if you can better your finishing position, regardless of where you are in the field, every point can matter. So it is important to try and beat some of those riders around you. So we picked up a couple of other guys on the way. So we're now looking at the front of this pack being 37th. 1.1 to go. One of Oscar, the Spanish rider there, has kind of hit out long, trying to break away. So I thought I'll try and follow that, but he does have the burrito, which means that the rider behind isn't going to actually get any draft. I just thought I'd try and do a bit of an effort. Hopefully he will run out of gas, and then I can use my aero helmet to come through him. Up to this point, like I say, nothing major happened. Stayed with these guys up the temple. A couple of my teammates out front had managed to take points on the Temple KOM, and the few points here and there on some of the sprint segments as well, which is really, really positive. So we've managed to pick up points kind of on all the segments throughout the race. So it seemed like quite a good race for our Wahoo Le team. Okay, so just with sort of 400 metres to go there, I thought I'd give it a little kick. It's not a major effort, just enough to he'd already made an effort. So I was quite confident that his sprint was going to be compromised then. So hit the aero and just a little bit of a kick. I got 2 seconds quite quickly just to come through him, just to secure that 37th place, which, it isn't a brilliant result on the face of it, but I was there to play a teammate role today, which is something that I managed to do on those first 2 sprints. So quite happy with my contribution, and it was actually quite an interesting race, even if for me it was really over after only 4 kilometres.